Hello everyone. I first of all want to say a very happy new year to all of you. Hope you have had a lovely Christmas, and obviously hopefully 2024 is going to be a good one for everyone. Obviously bringing you Mannequin of the Month for January 2024 today, and the topic we're going to talk about is an auxiliary officer in the Royal Naval Auxiliary Service, and we're going to talk a little bit about the auxiliary service as well, a little bit of the history. This was chosen, of course, via a poll over on Patreon, as all the Mannequin of the Month topics are. There's generally a poll with 3 options, and in fact 2 came in as a draw with 2 topics to cover this month. So I'm going to endeavour to cover the other topic as well. You'll see what that is going forward. I'm going to make my best efforts to cover the second topic this month as well. Obviously, as you saw in my previous video, Merry Christmas and the update, that depends somewhat on my new responsibilities. Very happy to have Robert. Wonderful. We've been trying for kids for a little while, and wonderful to have him, and he's doing really well. So I can't really describe in words how happy I am about all that. It really is just wonderful. But it is going to affect the channel, at least in the short term, primarily because I also have exams at the end of January. My solicitor's qualifying exams were mid to the end of January. So I'm going to be doing quite a bit of revision for that as well, which I have been doing as best I can. So January might be a very quiet month on the channel, and I just wanted to announce that at the start here and just make sure everyone's aware of that. And then in theory, videos should pick up because there's no real reason, I'm talking to my wife Lucy about this, there's no real reason why I can't film and take the time away. It doesn't take me that long to make these videos in a day, and particularly if I'm covering simpler topics, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. So there may be some videos looking at some smaller items and so forth as infill for the time being, and then get back to a more regular upload schedule going forward. So as I say, if there are any major changes to that, any sort of end of uploads for a little while, I will endeavour to let you know this time rather than just the radio silence which happened this last time. We ended up going to hospital, somewhat a spur of the moment thing. Yes, anyway, that's the little update at the start here. We'll get on to the main part of the video now and talk about what we have on the Mannequin here. So before we start talking about the uniform itself, we'll talk a little bit about the Royal Naval Auxiliary Service. The RNXS, as it was known by its initials, was essentially a civilian organisation auxiliary to the Royal Navy. And the role that the RNXS would serve during the Cold War was both to assist in port administration. They were also involved in taking ships to safe anchorages in the case of nuclear war. And they actually, obviously in the peacetime role, they ended up being involved in fleet reviews, providing security to fleet reviews and so forth, and various other tasks. Many were seagoing, many were not, many were involved in communications ashore. The Royal Naval Auxiliary Service was formed in 1962, really took shape in 1963, and it was formed from 2 preceding organisations, one of which was the Royal Naval Mine Watching Service, and the other was the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association. Now, both of these were derived from wartime organisations. So the Royal Naval Mine Watching Service was sort of a naval equivalent of the Royal Observer Corps, and they were responsible for spotting mines. And the idea of that was you would have a site, a mine watching site. Enemy aircraft would fly along coastlines, and they would seed coastal shipping lanes with mines and port entrances and so forth. And the mine watching service would be on duty when there was a threat of this, all volunteers of course, and they would plot the mines as they were dropped, and this would of course assist in sweeping the mines. So the Royal Naval Mine Watching Service was initially in that role, and some of them went to sea and so forth as well. And then you have the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association. Now this was an association formed of Admiralty ferry crews, and these men were basically unfit for service in the Royal Navy due to old age or infirmity or whatever, but nevertheless they were fit enough to cruise ships on relatively short journeys. There were some longer journeys as well, longer voyages. They could cruise ships when moving from port to port, so being delivered from the builders or being moved from one station to another, being moved from one squadron to another or whatever. You could put a crew on necessary for running the ship, but obviously not manning all of the guns and so forth. And you could sail the ship from one port to another, and then it would be handed over to the Royal Navy crew there for active duty. So the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association was an association of these personnel post-war who they were basically encouraged by the Admiralty to stick together. Obviously quite a lot of them were very old, even at the time of the Second World War. So the numbers of men in the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association by the 60s had sort of dropped off, but they were nevertheless merged together, and the idea was the 2 roles would be brought together. In time of war, you'd have this auxiliary to the Royal Navy able to carry out these tasks, and the RNXS would also take on other tasks as well. So as I say, in terms of shepherding ships to safe anchorages, port management, and basically providing these sort of auxiliary services to the Royal Navy, assisting in convoy formation, that sort of thing. So you have both shore-based and a float service in the RNXS, and that's sort of shown by some of the insignia on this, which we'll talk about as we move this round. Charting the insignia and the uniform of the RNXS is a little bit difficult. There is a good book out there which covers some of it, but it's a little bit patchy on the details. It's certainly not focused on uniform and so forth. It's more generally about the history, which is interesting in and of itself. But I managed to piece together some of the details of the uniform, and it's something I'm doing further research on, so I may well make a video talking about the RNXS as an organisation in the uniform and so forth, badges and different roles and so forth. Going forward, I'll make a video talking about that in a bit more detail when my research is complete. But talking about the uniform we have on the mannequin here, starting at the top, we have the standard headdress for the RNXS throughout its existence, which was the blue beret. And this was standard headgear for all orders of dress in the RNXS. Later on, going into I think the 80s, late 70s, 80s, they were allowed to wear Pucker Service Royal Navy uniforms, so the dress uniform of the Royal Navy. Officers wore an X in the curl on the rank, and there were other distinctions, but they continued to wear the beret with that uniform rather than the peaked cap of Royal Navy ratings and officers. So as I say, that's a differentiation there, is the beret was the standard headgear throughout the existence of the RNXS. The cap badge here is at this time standard for both auxiliary men and for auxiliary officers. Later on, again with the introduction of the sort of dress uniform, the Royal Navy dress uniform, you would have an officer's cap badge introduced, but at this time we have an auxiliary officer here. The cap badge is standard across all ranks. The cap badge itself, it looks like a ship's crest. It's styled after a ship's crest. You can see we have a rope border here around the device in the centre, which is the splash of a landing mine in enamel, and then we have the initials RNXS across here, across this band at the top, and it's surmounted by a crown. And this is copied directly from the Royal Naval Mine Watching Service cap badge, the device in the centre. Just the lettering has changed from RNMWS to RNXS. So the cap badge basically carried directly across from the Mine Watching Service. The uniform itself, you have a shirt here, of course, shirt and tie. It's worn open collar with a shirt and tie. The shirt for auxiliary men was the number 8 action working dress shirt, the blue shirt worn as action working dress in the Royal Navy. Not designed for wear with a tie, but it was worn with a tie in the RNXS, which doesn't lead to a very smart appearance, but that was what was done. Certainly photographs show auxiliary officers often wearing a white shirt in place of the action working dress shirt. You do see photos of them wearing action working dress shirts as well. We've gone for the white shirt here with a black tie, as you can see. The uniform is interesting in that it is a form of battle dress or working dress in Royal Navy parlance. They didn't really like to use the term battle dress when it came to naval uniforms. This is a Naval Air Ratings working dress blouse, and this is essentially a battle dress cut. It's a number 3A dress. So we've talked a little bit about number 5A and number 5B in previous videos, the officer's working dress, the officer's battle dress uniform, which was introduced in the Second World War. There was also a uniform for ratings in the Fleet Air Arm, and that's what we have here, and it's labelled as such. We will be taking a look at this in the future in that capacity, as just to have a look at the blouse itself, look at the labels, turn it inside out and so forth. But here it's been issued to an officer in the RNXS, and that's where the Royal Navy sourced these uniforms for the RNXS, was from these stocks of Naval Air Ratings working dress. So as I say, it is a battle dress blouse in form. It will hook up at the collar there. There is another button there as well, so it will close right up to the collar if required. You have the 2 breast pockets there, obviously no pocket pleats. All the buttons are concealed, in common with the number 5B, which was for Fleet Air Arm officers working dress. It was Fleet Air Arm officers working dress. That had concealed buttons in comparison to number 5A, which obviously had the exposed buttons. So you have concealed buttons, obviously, again, no snagging issues there. Closes at the waist with a buckle here, which is basically the same as that introduced on the Army's 1940 pattern battle dress. So it's the toothed buckle there, but blackened, chemically blackened, rather than just being in steel. And as you can see, as I say, that's a battle dress uniform. It even has the curve to the arms and everything. It is cut exactly per the sort of standard battle dress blouse, and obviously fastens at the waist with a buckle and everything, as you would expect. In terms of insignia, we have various things to look at here. We've got the badge, we have obviously medal ribbons here as well. So this auxiliary officer has obviously seen service during the Second World War. We have the 3945 star there, the Burma star, interestingly, the Defence Medal, and then the war medal here. Unfortunately, there's no name or anything in this, so I don't know. I don't believe there is. Could be wrong on that, but I have to do some research otherwise. It's a little bit difficult to research auxiliary men, because obviously you don't have the records in quite the same way as you would do with the Royal Navy proper. But as I say, it would be interesting to try and find out, obviously, particularly with the service in Burma, the Burma Star there, a little bit of the history of this officer. I say presume service in the Royal Navy during the Second World War. Doesn't necessarily follow, but it would make most sense to end up serving in the Royal Naval Auxiliary Service post-war. On the pocket here, the left breast pocket, we have the RNXS pocket flap badge, and this was introduced to sort of lift the uniform, make it a little bit more distinctive, smarten the uniform up a bit. This is the first pattern of this badge, and it's basically a development of that which had been produced for the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association, which had AFCA as opposed to RNXS. Otherwise, the two designs are basically the same, in grey with red and yellow embroidery to produce the anchor, the crown, and the lettering there. This was seen as being a bit bright and gaudy, so not long after the introduction of this, the badge was swapped to one which was in black and white. So a black backing with white lettering and anchor and so forth. And that was used later on. You still see some photos. I've seen some photos of chaps serving a float who are wearing overalls, and they've actually added the pocket badges onto their overalls, and one of them in the 80s still has one of these grey and yellow badges. This sort of uniform we're looking at here, so a point to mention here, is suitable sort of for the 60s, from the introduction, from the creation of the RNXS through until the 1970s, when a newer version of this uniform was introduced. And again, we'll hopefully talk a little bit more about the history of the uniform and so forth in a video going forward. It's quite a niche topic, but one I'm interested in, so hopefully I'll find some interested viewers out there to listen to that as well. That's the front of this anyway, as you can see. Other than the sort of slightly the distinctive insignia, a very simple battle dress uniform basically. Start moving this around now and have a look at some of the other details. Moving this round to look at the right hand side, we can see a distinctive feature of British battle dress uniform, and that is the forward curve to the arm. And obviously with the initial design for the British Army, this was intended to make it easier to bring a rifle up to the shoulder. If the arm is curved forward in that way, it gives you that freedom of movement when performing that motion. Obviously not really required with uniform for naval air ratings, but it remains part of the design and quite a distinctive feature. In terms of insignia here, we have the rank up on the shoulder, and this is the rank of an auxiliary officer. So there was no auxiliary sub-lieutenant, which is what this would indicate in the Royal Navy. A single bar and curl would be a sub-lieutenant. You then had auxiliary ahead of the naval ranks up to captain, I think was the senior auxiliary. So you'd have auxiliary captain as the senior officer's rank in the Royal Naval Auxiliary Service, but this is the only one that really differentiates, other than having auxiliary as a prefix. This is auxiliary officer rather than auxiliary sub-lieutenant. Down on the arm here we have further insignia. We have the RN Auxiliary Service shoulder title, which you can see there, and this has been slightly cut down. Originally it would have been an oblong, just say it's been cut down to fit the top of the sleeve there, and then we have an A underneath that, and all the insignia on this is really beautifully stitched on, so whoever did this did a very nice job. The A, as far as I'm aware, indicates service afloat as opposed to service ashore, which is a little difficult because obviously they both begin with A, but that's my understanding from the research I've done. This represents service afloat as opposed to a shore-based role, and that's the limit of the insignia here. If an auxiliaryman, in the Royal Naval Auxiliary Service, you'd have further insignia. You had equivalent rates to leading rate and so forth, with slightly different structure. And then you'd also have non-substantive badges, which showed basically your role within the auxiliary service. So you had equivalent to sort of stokers, mechanics and so forth. And they basically were derived from the mine watching service badges initially, and then they had developed a little bit. That's something we might talk about in a future video. It's something I'm currently researching to get a timeline of, and say it's quite a niche topic, but as I said, I may make a video talking about that going forward. That's the limit of the insignia here. Obviously, with it being an officer's uniform, we have the officer's rank on the shoulder there, and then just the shoulder title and the A down on the arm there. Looking at the back of this, there's not a huge amount more to see. Just a big piece of blue serge at the back here, really. Very, very plain. Little darts worked in around the waistband here, of course, to draw this in. It is a blouse. The waistband draws this all in around the hips. And that's pretty much it. Unfortunately, you'll be able to see all the cat fluff, which is accumulated on this while I've had it set up on the mannequin, unfortunately. Apollo does shed a little bit on new cat, so Please forgive the fluff on the berry, that will be defluffed at some point. I've just not had chance before filming, obviously for various reasons. So that's the back of the Mannequin anyway. And then round, looking at the left-hand side here, one thing I didn't mention about the officer's rank when we looked at the right-hand side is this is on a stiff shoulder board, as you would see used on tropical uniform greatcoats and so forth in the Royal Navy. It doesn't have a button at the top here, but it's shaped as if it should have. So this is per a Royal Navy officer's shoulder board, but without the button there, and obviously these are fixed, they're just sewn in place. The curl here, hopefully you can see that there, the curl, you'll notice, the lace comes in under and then around and over on top. And this is basically how these should be worn. The curl should always be steaming forward, basically. If it were a paddle wheel, it would be correct. If you understand what I'm trying to say there, it would be rotating in the right direction to be driving a ship forward. And that's the way you would always have the rank lace on Royal Navy officer's uniform. Very early photographs, that doesn't always hold true in the early era of this sort of lace being used on Royal Navy uniforms, but that is the way that this should be used, and obviously just illustrated here on this auxiliary officer's uniform. Otherwise, we have the same insignia here. The A is on both sides, as you can see. Details of the sleeve there. One thing I also didn't mention was the cuffs, and as you can see there, they have a concealed button to open those there, as you can see, with a little piece of black cotton stitched in there to provide the buttonhole. So that's the left-hand side of the uniform there. So as I say, a rather niche topic this, but I nevertheless hope you found it interesting looking at it. As I say, rather pleased to have this in the collection. It's a relatively recent arrival. I do have another example of these, a 70s example in diagonal serge, which is a little bit different. So it's nice to be building up sort of a timeline of the uniforms. It would be nice to find one of the later, perhaps officers or ratings uniform. Difficult to differentiate the ratings uniform, but an officer's uniform with the X in the cuff rank would be quite interesting to find. That changed, of course, to gold per the pucker service, per the Royal Navy, but with an X in the curl of the rank lace to show that an auxiliary officer rather than the officer in the Royal Navy proper. Obviously on this one we have the silver lace that would differentiate at this time period. So as I say, hopefully this has been interesting. Obviously if you have found it interesting and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. Thank you all very much indeed. And obviously, if you'd like to vote each month on what's going to be covered in Mannequin of the Month, the corporal tier over on Patreon gives you that option. So check that out if you're interested. If you'd like to see photographs of this, they will of course be posted up on social media. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. And I must apologise, I've been very remiss in checking those emails over the last couple of weeks for various reasons, obviously. I will be checking them soon. I'll be catching up with everyone over there, all being well. I'm very sorry on social media. Facebook just doesn't seem to notify me when new messages come in. So I do go in periodically and check and answer those I can. But obviously, just to let you know, Facebook Messenger, for some reason, through my Rifleman Moore page, is not particularly a good way of getting in contact with me, I'm afraid. I don't quite know why that's so bad, but it doesn't seem to notify me when I get messages. But I will be checking that as well. So if you're waiting to hear back from me, please do carry on waiting and I'll do my best to answer. I do hope you found this interesting, as I say. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.